PowerPoint presentation on the chapter The Portrait of a Lady written by Khuswant Singh. Chapter Sketch. The Portrait of a Lady is part of an autobiography by Khushwant Singh. In this story, the author draws a pen portrait of his grandmother. He beautifully unfolds their relationships and how it undergoes several changes. In other words, the story is a loving tribute from a grandson to his grandmother. The story gives a picture of human relationships. It's a realistic account of how the grandparents give all their time, attention and love to their grandchildren. About the writer. About the characters. Grandmother. Khushwant Singh's grandmother is described as an extremely religious person. She was a very kind lady. She was short, fat and slightly bent. Khushwant Singh, the author. He recounts his childhood days and his relationship with his grandmother. The author remembers his grandmother and grandfather. For 20 years, he found her old and wrinkled. The thought was almost revolting as for my grandmother being young and pretty. Author's grandfather's portrait hung on wall of drawing room. He wore a big turban, loose clothes and looking at least 100 years old. The author's grandmother. She was short, fat and slightly bent in nature. Her silvery white hair was scattered over her wrinkled face. He remembered her hobbling around the house in spotless white clothes with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other hand busy counting the beads of her rosary. She was like winter landscape in mountains. The author's childhood with his grandmother. His parents had gone to live in the city, leaving him behind the village under the care of his grandmother. She would get him ready for school, and would also feed him with chapati. The school is attached with a temple. All the children sat in the veranda reciting alphabets while his grandmother is engaged reading holy scriptures. Finally, in the evening, the author and the grandmother would walk back home feeding the dogs. The turning point in the relationship of grandmother and the author. After a friendly relationship with his grandmother, he had to adopt a new life in the city. This itself was a turning point for the grandmother and the grandson. Both of them was sent for to settle down in the city with his parents. The author went to an English school, but the grandmother never liked the way he was taught. Though Singh and his grandmother shared the same room, she was unable to help him. Apart from this, she was also disappointed that he was learning music that she considered not for gentlefolks. The common link of friendship gets snapped. When author went to university, then he was given a room of his own. The grandmother accepted her loneliness and rarely spoke to anyone. All day long, she sat spinning the wheel and reciting her prayers. Only, in afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed sparrows. The grandmother celebrates the author's return and fall sick. After 5 years he came back. Incredibly, he was welcomed by his grandmother, who was not grown a single day older. Singh notices that even at this time, when everyone is joyful about his return, grandmother's happiest moments was with her sparrows. Later in the evening there was a change in her attitude. She celebrated the return of her grandson by collecting some women of neighborhood and beating drum for several hours. Grandmother's death. The grandmother was diagnosed with a mild fever by the doctor, but she insisted that her and near. She didn't want to talk anyone and would rather spend her last moments praying. After a short while, the author noticed that his grandmother's lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. She was covered with a red shawl. The sparrows mourn her death. When the author and others came to take away the grandmother's body, they met a strange sight. To mourn her death, a lot of sparrows had surrounded the grandmother's body. They were all silent. When the author's mother offered the sparrows some bread, they refused to eat and quietly flew away after the grandmother's body was carried away for the last rites. Next morning the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. Values highlighted in this chapter. Love and protect the elderly. The chapter throws light on the need to give love and protection to elderly people. Through the chapter we learn how the grandmother gradually started drifting away from her grandson as well as the other family members. Give company to the elderly. We should never let our parents or grandparents feel lonely. We should treat them with love and give attention to their needs. Compassion for birds and animals. The chapter also teaches us the importance of being compassionate towards birds and other animals.